Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another discussion video. PPG Miami is fast approaching. That's going to be the first tournament of set 12. Pretty exciting stuff. With that being the case, I figured it was time to bring you guys my top 5 meta picks going into the beginning of set 12. Now, just like a little bit of a disclaimer, of course, these are my opinions, right? Like, this is a YouTube channel where I give you guys my opinion on Dragon Ball. But I am going to also try to, keep things relatively in check. Like, this is gonna also be based off like our teams testing, our testing conversations with other high profile players, but of course my opinions are going to be thrown in there. You guys may agree, you guys may disagree. You could almost view this as like a prediction video. Whether I'll be 100% correct or not will remain to be seen, but anyways, we're gonna get into it. If you guys are new here, definitely subscribe, hit that bell to miss a video. If you want to help support the channel, go down to the description. There are many ways to do so, particularly today, guys. If you want to compete in events like PPG Pro Play Tour, check out the Patreon. It'll help you step your game up. That being said, let's get started. First guy we gotta talk about Red Broly. He is probably gonna be the boogeyman of the format, and we talked about boogeymen before, right? Like Super Shenron, Mecha Frieza, different variants of SS3 Goku. Those have all been like the boogeymen of their respective formats, but I think like power level wise, I think those decks had like bigger gaps from the rest of the meta. If you're kind of following what I'm saying, I would put those decks much more so in a tier 0 slot than I would put Red Broly when compared to the rest of the meta. Yes, Red Broly is very strong. I personally do not think it is the undisputed best deck. I know many players who are of that opinion though, and I can't totally fault them for thinking that. I just don't personally agree. I do think there are other decks that can beat Red Broly, have good matchups. I think this format overall realistically comes down to so much player skill and player knowledge, because you just see like certain matchups like Red Broly versus Mecha, Red Broly versus Dark Broly, and you just see certain players like get crushed one way or the other, just like very much depending on how they play the matchup. Like Red Broly is one of those things where you can like take a matchup real slow and just try and wear your opponent down with crit, or you can be super fast. If you do either of those things in a matchup where it's not so good to do one of those things in, it's gonna have really negative repercussions. So I think for that reason, just the amount of player skill that seems to be involved in this format, I just don't think Red Broly is of that tier 0 status. But again, many other players do think it is. It's definitely gonna be one of the strongest decks of the meta though. I'm not trying to say it's not going to be in any way, shape, or form. It's definitely going to be one of the top decks of the meta, and that's really not super surprising when it was already really strong in set 11/draft box 6 meta, and you basically had the 3 top aggro decks. 2 out of 3 of them took a hit, but Red Broly got out pretty much unscathed. So it's not really surprising. I think Red Broly is definitely going to be a deck that warps the format to a degree as well, but I don't quite think it's in the sense of like you can't play X deck if Red Broly exists. Like there are many matchups where Red Broly just like has really easy time. Think about things like Invoker, for instance. Just some decks that are just like too slow to get the ball rolling. But even like you hear a lot of times that Red Broly like auto beats green, like auto beats things like Gotenks. There are ways to tech for that matchup that I think decks can do, and players are gonna have to kind of figure out how to do that. We will talk about this specific green tech once we get to green, because green is involved in this video. But anyways, Red Broly is going to be ridiculously strong. Piccolo Jr. Giant Force though, I think is one of the main cards to look at going forward for this deck. I mean, it's really no secret that this is the strongest unison you could play in the deck. It's really just outclassed Kale in every single way. Removes one of your biggest problem cards, which is Dark Power Black Mass Sand, but also resolving that -6. I think that's going to be the main way Red Broly is going to win. We saw it in the finals just last weekend on the PPG webcam event. It was a totally different game when Red Broly was able to resolve Piccolo Jr. Giant Force versus when they were not able to resolve it. It really was just like an entire different power level, right? So I think both saying that as a Broly player and someone playing against Red Broly, if you have the ability to remove the Piccolo Jr. unison, take that opportunity. Do it if the situation makes sense to do it. It's not always gonna be super easy, because if you tap out, invest a lot of resources into doing that, you can get punished severely, depending on your life total, depending on your hand size, depending on what color you're playing. But you got to kind of figure that out, and that's what I'm talking about. This format seems like it takes a lot of player skill. There are some matchups where I have the free ability to just remove Piccolo Jr. It's only got 2 or 3 markers on it. You take it out, but other times it just takes too many resources to try and take it out, and you really got to know those situations. But anyways, no joke, no surprise. Red Broly is going to be one of the top decks of the meta. Next up, we're talking about Dark Broly. I think this guy is like the low-key boogeyman of the format. Like everyone's like, oh, Red Broly, man, Red Broly is so crazy, so broken. Dark Broly is gaining popularity at like a ridiculous rate. Virtually no one was playing this deck at the beginning of set 11, and I think that's, you know, for relatively fair reasoning. It is a relatively difficult deck to pilot. It does take very proper sequencing, takes graveyard management. You basically have to keep track of more things than if you're playing almost any other Dragon Ball Super deck, right? So it definitely is a bit more taxing, but now that players have had more time to, you know, master it, get used to it, we're going to see Dark Broly a lot more. Like, look at last week's webcam event. Dark Broly was the most highly represented deck in the entire tournament at 18 players. Then Red Broly and Vedex were tied at 14 players with those respective decks. This deck is just a big powerhouse. I don't think it's going to be, even though it takes up the most representation, I don't think it's going to become the default best deck either. Because Dark Broly, again, it does take a well-versed player to do really well with it. But it's not a perfect deck, you know, like sometimes you can run into issues with defending. You don't have the best floodgates, so if your opponent can go really wide on the board on you, you're gonna have to combo 5k every time. And while your leader does that very, very efficiently, you can even combo with 30ks that are in rest mode on your board. If the onslaught is real enough, you're going to be spending a lot of cards to defend against that. And that's been one of the main things I've noticed with like Red Broly versus Dark Broly. Whoever can kind of get their opponent to spend more resources the fastest is generally going to have the upper hand. But of course, being able to main deck Mecha Frieza, the Broken Seal, is a huge boon that Dark Broly has going for it. I mean, I think we're really moving into an environment where set 10 decks, set 11 decks, and set 12 decks are all very viable. Like, I don't think a lot of the set 10 or 11 decks are super heavily power crept out of this. Like, we won't see a ton of them in this video, but right here, for instance, you have a set 11 deck. We just talked about a set 11 deck, and while this is a top 5 meta strategy video, there are going to be many decks that are in like a tier 2/rogue spot that are going to be from set 10, some even from set 9, like not set 9 Jiren, for instance, is one of those decks. But Mecha Frieza is going to specifically excel against the set 11 decks that are so archetype heavy, like the mirror match, like Red Broly, like Green Gotenks, and it's got some reach in some other matchups as well. It's just really dependent on what matchup you're looking at, but it is going to be a really good thing going for Dark Broly as we move forward. Next up, guys, we got to talk about Mecha Frieza. This one is a really weird one to talk about because I think upon release, people thought this was going to be the undisputed best deck for maybe like a week or so. There were some talks about it, but it is a really strong yellow deck. Like, yellow was struggling there for a while. I think Mecha Frieza is going to breathe some new life into yellow, which in my opinion is a very cool thing to see. Yellow is much like blue in the sense that they want to lean into their very generically powerful cards, and Mecha Frieza allows you to do that with extra cards, battle cards, you name it. You don't have to play, you know, necessarily an archetype. You can just play really strong yellow cards, and when you're able to resolve one or multiple U9 assembles in a game, that's where Mecha is going to feel really unfair. There are going to be some issues of, you know, not drawing the card because it is an unsearchable 4 of, so sometimes you're not always going to have it in a timely manner, but when you do, the deck just feels absurdly powerful. Now, some versions of Mecha are playing and some are not playing the Lord Slug / Angela engine. I personally have been liking it a lot. I know a lot of players who are not a big fan of it, but it does give Mecha Frieza a lot of deck building options, which is definitely a really cool thing. Lord Slug, you can take a little bit more of a control route, prevent your opponent from drawing cards via their super combos, via Sand Instincts, or any other drop area pluses they might have, depending on what strategy you're up against, right? So you can go that route. You can go the full Cell Xeno Turbo route if you want to just, like, you know, rip through your deck with Unite Assemble, hopefully draw Cell Xeno, put 12 cost worth of bodies on the board and just go that route. But I think you can also play this deck as a very control style as well. So Mecha Frieza, I think, is going to start the revival of yellow in this next meta. And next up, guys, another yellow deck, which we really don't look at this as a yellow deck because it is a pure archetype. They realistically could have printed Sin in like any color and it would still be the same deck, right? So that's why we don't really incorporate this when we're talking about pure yellow. But Sinchenron, looking to be really strong. I mean, when you're a deck that gets solid support 3 sets in a row, I mean, can you really be surprised? Sinchenron just has a lot of stuff going for it. It's got insane recurability. Like, the main 9-drop engine is just nuts, right? Like, that's really no surprise. Your 9-drop comes out, negates anything your opponent plays, no matter how many cards they play in a single turn, revenge blocker, and then if they manage to kill it, you plus incredibly hard. Now, this deck is not without bad matchups. Things like Dark Broly that can remove your negative energy Dragon Balls from the drop area very easily. That is a really tough matchup for Sinchenron. Likewise, Shroom and Salsa is also a deck coming out in set 12, which has the ability to do a very similar thing, albeit, you know, Shroom and Salsa might not dominate the meta, but when you're up against that as Sin, it's going to feel a little bit rough. I do think Sin is still very well positioned, though, as probably the premier control deck of the meta. But I am actually very curious to see how Dark King's Flash interacts with Sinchenron. This activate mana on this card is literally just anti-Sinchenron in pretty much every way. And I've heard a lot of Sin players say that it's not going to be too crazy because, like, if they just do this, you can go Fu Shrouded and, you know, probably win with your already established board. And that's possible. I mean, that really depends on what the board state looks like. So that's not really like a super definitive thing that you could say, in my opinion. But I think that decks that generally struggle against Sin, like decks that want to go late game, but they just can't match Sin's like tap 6 maximum value play, they're probably going to side Dark King's Flash. And I do wonder how it's going to impact Sin and its role in the meta, but we're going to have to kind of wait and see on that one. Finally, guys, we're looking at green here. So in terms of green, I think green is still solid. And I think when looking at green, you're going to see two main themes here. I think it's going to be Gotenks at number 1, Turles at possibly a close second. I did do an article talking about green's position in the upcoming meta in set 12. And I think Turles and Slug are both very hit or miss. Turles, I think, has much more potential than Slug. That's, again, my personal opinion. I still don't think Slug is guaranteed to do exceptionally well, but I have been playing it a lot, and it does seem quite good to me. So I'm going to slot Turles in there. But Gotenks, in my opinion, is going to be just a little bit of a higher tier above because it's so consistent in what it does. It drops one of the most powerful boss monsters / battle cards in the game, Grim Reaper. But I really think that if you're playing green right now, guys, you got to be playing a turn 1 Unison, probably Demigod Unison of Sorcery. That turn 1 ability to potentially use Charismatic Villain is going to help so much against Red Broly, Dark Broly, so many of these aggro decks. Like, turn 1 Charismatic Villain is so good against so many decks. I really strongly recommend it. I think this is one of the ways you can tech to deal with something like Red Broly, which normally would give you a really tough time. Demigod Unison of Sorcery, for us at least here at Crossworld, has been doing very well. And now that leads me to the final point of this video, guys. There's no blue here. I don't know if I would slot any blue deck in at the top 5. I really don't. I do think Soul Striker is still a solid pick, probably as like a tier 2 / rogue deck. I don't think people are quite building Soul Striker right. Of course, there's Soul Striker Janemba and like Soul Striker Agents, which are like basically archetype decks. Those pretty much build themselves to a certain degree. But like pure blue Soul Striker, I think you got to be playing pseudo combos. I think you got to be teching a little bit more to beat stuff like Dark Broly and beat stuff like Red Broly. But I just don't think people are doing that at the moment. But if you guys made it to the end of the video, you got a little bit of advice from me on how I think Soul Striker should be built. I have seen some success with pseudo combos in Soul Striker, helping me out combo like certain crit attacks in Red Broly and things of that nature. But anyways, guys, that's my thoughts on the upcoming meta, at least the beginning of it. I do want to know in the comments below where you agree or disagree. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.